In the 1960s, you had two cultural shocks. You had the rise of the welfare state, and then you had second wave feminism that came at exactly the same time that deceived women into believing that femininity is weak, masculinity is toxic in men but empowering in women, that marriage is oppressive, that the home is a prison, and that children are a burden.
Delano Squires is the director of the Richard and Helen DeVos Center for Human Flourishing at the Heritage Foundation. He's the author of the soon-to-be-released book titled The Vanishing Black Family: How Welfare and Feminism Made Marriage Optional and Children Vulnerable. Specializing in the themes of marriage and the family, Delano is also a frequent contributor to the American Conservative and The Blaze, and he joins me now. Delano Squires, thank you for joining us today on SPUCTV. Now, Delano, your soon-to-be-released book, The Vanishing Black Family: How Welfare and Feminism Made Marriage Optional and Children Vulnerable, in its very title speaks to the reality that welfare and feminism, at least in your opinion, have hurt the black family over the years. But can we also add abortion into that mix, would you say?
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you for having me. And what I say in the book in terms of the current state of black family formation and family dynamics is that in the 1960s, you had two cultural shocks that hit the family, particularly starting with black families, at exactly the same time. You had the rise of the welfare state, again, in the mid-1960s, where welfare went from sort of a temporary safety net to a multi-generational way of life, particularly for very low-income women. And what that did was displace men from their rightful and God-given position as providers in their home. And then you had the second wave feminism, right? The second wave feminism that came at exactly the same time. That, the way I put it in the book is that deceived women into believing that femininity is weak, masculinity is toxic in men but empowering in women, that marriage is oppressive, that the home is a prison, and that children are a burden. And that last one, that children are a burden, gets to the question that you asked in terms of abortion. And one of the goals, if not explicitly stated, of the second wave feminist movement and the women's liberation movement more generally, is to give women what they would have characterized as full autonomy over their reproductive rights. And translated into real speak, that means the ability to terminate a pregnancy and to end the life of an unborn child in the womb. There might have been certain circumstances that they would have said that's appropriate, but now we're at a position where the most zealous advocates for abortion rights believe that that a woman has that quote unquote right for any purpose up until the moment a child is born. So yes, that had a devastating effect on the formation of black families and in many respects, a lack of family formation, because abortion was pushed as a means for both racial and gender empowerment.
Your views there, Delano, tie up very much with those of a previous guest we had on recently, Carrie Gress, who speaks a lot about the issue of feminism. And not just the kind of, it's a widely held belief in conservative circles that, feminism has been a bad deal for men. But her argument, it's been a bad deal for everyone, essentially, men and women at the end of the day. And then you bring into this, the third party it's been bad for, children as well, primarily. Now, Delano, what else can readers expect from your book? It's out June of this year, I believe.
That's correct, June 16th. So what they can expect is an honest and forthright analysis of where the black family is today. And obviously all families are not in the same place. I'm using the black family as a sort of an archetypical, like an archetype of a particular institution that involves particular people with a particular history and a particular culture. So what they can expect is an analysis of where things started. So I start the book by talking about the impact of chattel slavery on the development of the black family, and particularly how the institution of slavery and the institution of marriage are two completely incompatible institutions, because the latter, marriage, comes with a series of duties and responsibilities and obligations that husband and wife have towards one another. And expectations, like the expectation that husband and wife will live together, that there will be monogamy and sexual exclusivity, and particularly from husband to wife, the expectation of protection, physical protection and provision. And when you are owned by someone else, and that third party can either sell husband or wife off to another plantation, or that third party can insert himself in the middle of that couple's, sexual relationship, then you can't guarantee those expectations, duties, and obligations within that institution. So I talk about the impact of slavery. I talk about the impact of welfare on displacing men as providers, the impact of feminism. I talk about the failure of Black leaders to address this issue over the course of decades, and how their failure is one of the reasons that the issue is spread. And I talk about the role of the Black church, and particularly progressive Black pastors who trade biblical fidelity for the appearance of social justice. And I talk about them because they are going to be an obstacle to family reformation and revival, because they are much more interested in advancing a progressive political agenda than calling attention to this particular issue. And in the second half of the book, I propose solutions. I talk about the cultural revolution that's needed. First and foremost, to see the issue of family reconstruction, and this is an idea that I think is broadly applicable, not just to the Black family, but see family reconstruction as a civil rights movement focused on the rights of children. And what I argue is that every child has a right to the affection, protection, connection, correction, and direction of the man and woman who created him or her, and that right is best exercised in a loving, low-conflict household. So I talk about reframing the issue, moving it away from the desires of adults to the needs of children. And I say that there are key institutions that have to advance this issue. First and foremost, the church, and also historically Black colleges and universities. And then I give readers a sense of where opposition to this movement will come from. I named 6 specific groups, including big government liberals, including LGBT activists who will oppose family reconstruction, and including abortion providers who will oppose family reconstruction for very specific issues. I talk about the impact of media and culture, and then I rally marriage advocates for battle, because I do believe it will be a battle. It took 60 plus years to get, to get to this point. It will probably take at least 2 to 3 generations to turn things around. So this is not just a book about complaints. It really is a blueprint on how to do family reconstruction in the modern age.
And I think that's so important that, as you say, the book doesn't just diagnose the problem, it offers solutions, because much of conservative discourse, whether online or in text, in print media, refers to the problems, shouts about the problems without offering solutions. Now, Delano, much of what we're talking about here, though not particularly controversial to you and I, would be considered very controversial to many people out there. Do you get much pushback specifically from other Black Americans?
Yes, and the irony is that it doesn't come from the places many people would assume. Many people would assume that a book that upholds the traditional family structure, man and woman living together as husband and wife, raising their biological children under one roof, they would assume that the major pushback would come from anyone who fails to meet that ideal, for lack of a better term. But I know, unmarried mothers, personally, who are quite excited about the book and quite supportive of my work, because they know the difficulty of trying to raise a child with only one involved parent, right? They understand that it makes no sense to argue, whether implicitly or explicitly, that it takes 2 for nature, but only 1 for nurture, right? They get that on a very fundamental level. I tend to get the most pushback from my peers who are college educated, just like me, and who are married with children, just like me. And the reason why is because some of them feel that promoting the ideals that they embody is a form of judgment against particularly lower income, Black families. They feel, particularly with the book subtitle, that I'm blaming women for their plight in life. And many of them are just uncomfortable with the idea of using prescriptive language when it comes to matters of hearth and home. Some of them, and I'll add in this, they see me, they see I work at a conservative think tank, and they say, okay, this is just, trying to promote conservative values, and where's the attention on systemic racism or on structural inequality? So it's a mixed bag. But what I find is that the people who are most likely to not necessarily have lived out these ideals in their personal life tend to be much more open to the arguments than those who embody what it is that I promote.
Yes. Yes. So in simple terms, a woman who's raised children on her own, there might be pushback from her. She's saying, well, hang on, I did a good job. And of course, we're saying, no, we hugely respect the fact that you've done a good job raising your children, but you shouldn't have had to, basically. It shouldn't have had to be that hard for you, yeah. Now, Delano, sadly, it's long been the case that Black women in the US are having abortions at a disproportionately high rate. Just some stats here. Data from the CDC from 2022 found that though Black Americans made up just 11.7% of people living in the US that year, Black women accounted for 39.5% of abortions in that year. Now, some will say this is simply because of structural inequalities, but is there more to this, do you think?
Absolutely, there's more to this. I mean, one of the things just points back to the premise of the book, right? In that same CDC report, it shows that 87% of women who sought abortions were unmarried. So there's a direct link between family structure and abortion outcomes. And I mean, you can think about it in a very sort of practical manner. When a man and woman commit to one another in marriage, and they stand in front of family and friends and their God to do that, they're not just committing to one another; they're committing to everything that comes from that union. And oftentimes, for most couples, that includes children. So, neither husband nor wife is inclined to destroy their offspring when it happens within the bonds of marriage. But when you have, either no relationship or a weak relationship with a person, when it's just a casual hookup and you might not even know their middle or last name, then it's a lot easier to say, well, this I'm not ready for a child. This is going to be a burden on me, and I won't be able to go to university. I won't be able to do certain things. So let me just get rid of the child, right? So I'm not surprised that basically 90% of women who seek abortions are unmarried. And I think this speaks to the issue of my book, because only 35% of Black adults in the United States are married. So that means that many children are conceived outside of wedlock. And many mothers are low income and struggling to take care of themselves, and sometimes their existing children. So it's easier for some of them to say, I'm not going to go through this, at this point. And on top of that, they have their elected officials promoting abortion. They have organizations like Planned Parenthood setting up in their neighborhoods. They have celebrities telling them that they should choose themselves and prioritize their own, education and economic interests. And oftentimes they don't have supportive partners on the other side who say, no, we can get through this, we can do this together. So I think it's a mix of circumstances that lead to those disparities. But I will note, and I note in the book, particularly progressives will focus on any racial disparity, particularly between Blacks and whites in the United States. The bigger the disparity, the bigger the focus. And they will focus on any issue that they believe constitutes harm to the quote unquote Black body, whether that's incarceration or it's, fatal police shootings. The only exception to that rule is abortion, where you have a huge racial disparity and you have the worst type of destruction to the Black body. And you add into that, they also focus on organizations that have a sordid racial history. But again, they make an exception for Planned Parenthood and the eugenics agenda of Margaret Sanger. So it is odd to me that this one particular racial disparity that disproportionately affects the Black body and Black babies in particular, is something that the left, the political left in America, not only is silent about, but they promote as a social good.
Yes, and the political left within the Black American community itself. So we saw the recent passing of Jesse Jackson, someone who, correct me if I'm wrong, flipped from very much pro-life to very much pro-abortion in the latter part of his career. Now, at risk of sounding like Tucker Carlson, what was that? What's going on there?
It's hard to say. I mean, people shift positions over the course of years, but you're right. And right around when Roe versus Wade was decided, Jesse Jackson talked about abortion as genocide. He even talked about Black family breakdown from a very moral perspective in the mid 1980s. But eventually, I think, as someone who was a standard bearer on the political left within his party, right? He's a Democrat. He saw that the party moved and moved quite rapidly over the course of years in one direction. And it probably would have been hard for him to stay grounded where he was. Now, let me be generous and assume that in his personal capacity, he, like many progressives, will say, well, I'm personally pro-life. But when it comes to politics, I'm pro-choice. So that's quite possible. But it's not lost on me that it is very hard to find a national Democrat who is publicly pro-life. So I think it's one of those things where he just got caught up in the current of the political movement. And Democrats right now are a party that not just tolerates abortion. They're not the party of safe, legal, and rare. They're the party of shout your abortion, abortion up until the point of birth, and abortion as a moral and social good.
Yes, we've come some way from safe, legal, and rare. Delano, your advice, which you gave at the recent Live Action Young Leaders Summit, is, in your words, to finish school, get a job, get married, and have children, in that order specifically. Now, apart from this, I think generally being good advice for young people, do you think if more people lived by this, we'd see a reduction in what are skyrocketing abortion rates in the Western world?
Absolutely. Again, looking at that connection between family structure and the social outcomes, my sense is that if we had, a massive increase in the number of marriages, and that if sex was reserved for its God-given purpose within the bounds of marriage, I certainly hope we would have a reduction in abortions, and that playbook that you just talked about that I've mentioned at the Live Action event. That's referred to as the success sequence because it's based on actual research by both Brookings Institution and American Enterprise Institute that shows when young people finish high school, get a job, get married, then have children in that order, they have a single-digit chance of being in poverty when they get in their mid-30s. And several states have introduced bills that would bring the success sequence to students, to teenage students, particularly in K through 12 in the classroom. But I want to note something. The bill that went forward in Ohio, right, to introduce success sequence to kids, to students, K through 12 students, was opposed by Planned Parenthood. And the reason, again, is because Planned Parenthood understands something about its bottom line, which is more marriage, less abortion. So they said, oh, there's no one recipe for success, but the idea that any person, any adult would oppose children learning in a descriptive manner about the ways in which they can order their lives to avoid poverty, it makes no sense that any adult would oppose that unless that adult understands that family dysfunction works for their benefit. And I think Planned Parenthood understands that better than most.
Yes. Now, Delano, you've aligned yourself recently with Katie Faust's Greater Than campaign. Katie Faust is someone who will soon be appearing on SPUCTV, who I believe was at the Young Leaders Summit you were at recently. Now, the core tenet of the Greater Than campaign, as you'll know, but for the sake of our viewers, is that the rights of children should always take precedence over the desires of adults. You've touched upon this already. Apart from the obvious one, which is abortion law, what other laws benefit adults, would you say? What other existing laws benefit adults specifically to the detriment of children?
One of the big ones in the United States is same-sex marriage, right? So one of the goals of the campaign is eventually to overturn Obergefell, that legalized same-sex marriage in all 50 states and preemptively prohibited states from setting their own marriage laws. Obergefell basically says, okay, well, marriage is not just between one man and one woman, it's between two consenting adults. And why is that important? How is that connected to children? Because every marriage, family policy is downstream from marriage law. And what I mean by that is this: if two consenting adults can be married, in terms of what the state allows, then those two adults can march down to, the foster care agency and demand to adopt a child. And that agency will have no basis on which to deny that adoption. So that means that children who were created by two other adults, right, one man and one woman, are now seen as sort of the rightful property, for lack of a better term, of two other unrelated adults.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, and I write about this in the book in terms of getting rights right. And what I mean by that is this: when we talk about rights, we should always think about corresponding obligation. So when a man and a woman create a child, they are the people who are most obligated to providing for that child. But two adults who didn't create a child have no right to somebody else's creation, because if that's the case, that means someone is obligated to give you a child just because you desire one. So I think it's important to get rights right and to reshape family law and marriage policy so that the rights of children, to your point about Katie, trump the desires of adults. And the other thing that's important, and I want viewers to understand this, is that the progressives who push for Obergefell and same-sex marriage in countries across the West, and did so by minimizing the importance of religion, minimizing the importance of tradition, and minimizing the importance of children's rights, have no basis on which to claim that their preferred definition, which is two consenting adults, should remain in place in perpetuity. Because when three consenting adults, or four, or six, say that they should be able to get married, then who is the government to deny them that? And when some jurisdiction grants them a marriage license, and those six people, those four men and two women, march down and say, now we should have a right to adopt a child, then on what basis can the adoption agency deny them that? So we should think well about what the practical implications of prioritizing the desires of adults over the needs of children.
And it's been encouraging to see, Delano, that the movement, for example, against surrogacy right now isn't just led by you and I, who might be, we could easily be dismissed as being on the Christian right or whatever. It's being led by classical liberals as well, particularly in this country, in the UK. Mm-hmm. It's a real umbrella movement of people who recognise, hang on, that this isn't right. Now, finally, Delano, I would say there's a general feeling right now that young boys are being unfairly blamed, I think, for certain social ills, whether that be young working class white boys in the UK or young black boys in America. Take, for example, two recent, one was a documentary, Netflix's Manosphere, and Netflix's show, I don't know if it made it to America, Adolescence, which came out last year, a drama which very much targets young boys, making out that young boys are the problem. Now, there's also reason to believe that whilst Gen Z men are more likely to be conservative, Gen Z women are more likely to be liberal. So I think you're dead right in that we should be encouraging people to marry, but Can you see how marriage maybe doesn't look like the most attractive prospect to young men specifically right now, young men in the West? How do we turn that around? How do we remind young men that really marriage is something we've been doing for centuries and it's worked and it will continue to work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the unfortunate aspects of where we are in terms of the global West, in terms of society, is this discord and tension between the sexes. And I see that as by far the most concerning of all the different tensions between different groups. All right, because it's possible to have ethnic tension in a country and for the country to move forward. I'm not saying it's pleasant, but it's possible. But it's impossible to have tension between the sexes and think that the country is going to survive. And in fact, what you have is you have a situation where, for lack of a better term, the red pill right, and if I could use the archetype of a Andrew Tate, for instance, and the blue-haired left, and think of your, stereotypical gender studies professor, are saying the exact same things to their respective camps. That marriage is a bad deal, it's bad for us, whether us as young men or us as young women, because the other side has every incentive to not live up to their obligations when it comes to the deal. And if you want kids, you're better off just getting those children on your own, and not signing up to give away either half of your resources or the best of your years to the opposite sex. That is a terrible thing for society. How do we turn it around? I think through much prayer and fasting, and I'm not saying that to be flip. I mean, certain things I think are going to take spiritual reformation. On a more practical, political, or cultural level, I think part of it is painting a picture, particularly for young men, of what life looks like when you cast aside, one of the most important formational moments in a man's life, which is when he gets to the point where he realizes that he desires a wife and desires to have a family. Because the number of people who I've met in my life who are genuinely content without any romantic relationship and without the prospect of children is extremely small. And so one is to say, thinking that you're going to go through life without ever desiring a wife or kids would put you in a very small minority. The other thing, and again, practically for men, is like when men get to the end of their lives, the people who are most likely to be caring for them and looking out for them are their wives and children. And then it's letting men know, you say that, oh, well, I don't need a wife and kids. I'm just going to earn a bunch of money, buy a big house, and live like a king. But a king with no queen and no heirs is just a guy living in a big house. So I don't think that the vision that they're being sold on is one that they will actually desire, particularly as they get older. So it's a mix of things. Some, again, in the spiritual plane, some on the cultural plane, and then potentially some on the political plane as well.
Delano, this is, I could continue, but this has easily been one of the most fascinating conversations I've had on SPUCTV. So thank you for that. And I do genuinely really look forward to reading your book. Now, please let our viewers know, Delano, where they can buy it and when it's out.
So the book is out June 16th, is available for pre-order now. Quickest way, just Google Delano Squires book or Delano Squires Vanishing Black Family. It'll pop up. Available all your major, retailers. You can buy it from Penguin Random House directly, or Amazon, Target, Walmart, anywhere that books are sold. You can buy the book, and I appreciate any support, any feedback, and I really think it's an important issue, and one where some of the solutions that I'm sharing are more generally applicable. And I'm looking forward to the book coming out and me doing, more conversations. This has been a fantastic conversation, and thank you for doing it. And I look forward to what lies next.
Brilliant. Thank you, Delano. Thank you very much for your time and for your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.